So for today's talk, we have Camilo Godoy Pichón. He's a PhD student in sociology at the University of Florida. He holds a master's degree in international studies and is a sociologist from the Universidad de Chile. His research focuses on environmental governance, socio-environmental conflicts, and the expansion of extractive industries in Latin America, with particularly attention to salmon aquaculture in southern Patagonia. His work combines qualitative methods and social network analysis to examine how state and non-state actors interact in context of environmental conflict and transnational governance. So Camilo will talk us today about salmon aquaculture and environmental governance, emerging tensions in southern Patagonia, Chile, and Argentina. So with that, Camilo, thank you for your presentation, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much for being here. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I am Camilo Godoy, as Hernan said. I'm from Chile. Today I'm intending to make this presentation, which was like the core, like the skeleton of my MA thesis. But after that, I continue like adding some layers that I think that would be interesting to show and to hopefully discuss today. Yeah, to have these nurturing conversations. So yeah, my theme of the research is based on salmon aquaculture and the expansion towards like the subantarctic region. How is being pushed by the Chilean government to kind of push like the local development in that zone. So in terms of the location, where was this study conducted? This is like the bottom of South America. So it's a very snowy region, as you can see here. Like this was part of my one photograph that I took for my fieldwork. So it's very snowy. It's like a very cold place. If you look at here, like you can see like the Google Earth. It's like very close to the Antarctic region. Yeah, it's called subantarctic Patagonia, and this is the southernmost region of South America. It has a very interesting and very like a unique combination in terms of like the biological diversity, like the cultural diversity, and it's a very important place to study for reasons that I will address from this moment on. Yeah, the sun study was like the Beagle Channel, which is like this kind of river that it's seen here. And it's like dividing these two countries, which are Argentina on one side and Chile on the other side. And they have like very different kind of traditions in terms of governance and in terms of like every linking to the political and cultural orientation of each territory is very different. And this, yes, the Beagle Channel is located at Cape Horn, Cabo de Hornos, or Tierra del Fuego in Spanish, which is like the southern border between Chile and Argentina. And the context of the site was mainly between 2018 and 2022. At this moment, there was, I will kind of deepen in this a little more, but there was like this convergence in South America in terms of like this conservative type with Bolsonaro, Macri, Piñera. These presidents push mostly like Macri and Bolsonaro. Macri and Piñera try to develop an agenda to like push the aquaculture towards like the southern parts of like the region in order to look for development, economic development. But this created a lot of resistance in the local communities. And this is something that I will try to address like in this presentation. So the contribution, in my humble opinion, of this research would be, firstly, like this is situated in a very kind of interdisciplinary territory, because I made this, my MA thesis was mostly based on like international studies, but also I have to kind of look into the geographic literature, the economic studies, and the public policy studies. However, there was kind of a gap in this territory, which was very kind of compelling to me because there was not very much research on social sciences in this region for the case of like how are these actors related to nature and how these actors kind of impact into nature and how this was kind of being analyzed from a social sciences perspective. So I think that my research tries to cover in some way this kind of regional gap in terms of address this question of try to cover a little more how are like these environmental decisions affecting like local communities. The photograph that I choose to look and to show today is for me is very like kind of illustrative because this photograph is from 2019, and this was at Puerto Williams, which is like the Chilean part of Cape Horn. And in this picture, you can see different actors. On one side, you can see the kings of Norway. You hear the king, the queen. And on the other side, you can see like the local community. Some of them are indigenous Yagan people. And this is like the elder from the last person living from the Yagan community that has like this heritage of like being like the last Yagan like with the language and all of that, because most of them were exterminated during the 19th and 20th century. And they are having this kind of scene in which the Christina is telling them that we don't want your aquaculture in our territory because this is ours. This is our son. This is our ancestral land. We don't want like your endeavors like in here. So I thought that this image was very illustrative to begin with. For the case of the context, we have to address initially in terms of like the economic trends, like the Chile is the second largest exporter of farmed salmon after Norway. If we look at here, like this is a report from Mowi, which is one of the most important like Norwegian companies for salmon farming, and a report from 2025 from last year indicated that Chile had like a kind of an increase, like a trend of an increased growth of its salmon production aquaculture. And on the other hand, like Norway also had a tendency of increase like salmon production, but like the scale is very different. If we consider that in here, Norway is like probably at 1,400 tons, and Chile is like at 700 tons per year. So like the scales are very different. And at the same time, we have to consider that this trend of kind of constant growth in the case of Chile is had some valleys between 2007 and 2010, which was like the ISA crisis, which had like a local impact and a very important impact in decreasing the production because it generated like there was a kind of a massive viral outbreak in Chilean salmon farming at this time, where there was due to infection mostly by like the pressure on the ecosystem and the antibiotics, there was an outbreak of this ISA, which of course led to a decrease in the activity during this time, and this of course generated like some changes in the aquaculture industry at a local level. In terms of like the like the moments or periods that we can try to find for aquaculture expansion, we have to remember that this was firstly developed by the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet during the 80s and the 90s. Firstly, where they kind of tried to attract like the Norwegian capitals, like the foreign capitals, in order to convert like these zones and these spaces and locations to be more attractive and to kind of be more export driven. This was because different authors refer and say that one particular thing from the aquaculture system in Chile is that it's very export driven. It's not very preventive comparing to like Norwegian case, which has like more attention to like the biological and microbiological dimensions of the of like the production. In the case of Chile, it's like very oriented towards like the global market, which will be the US and China, firstly. A very interesting trend that has been developed throughout the last years has been like the production has been going to the south and moving to the south. So in here you can see like where did it start? Well, it started like the first salmon aquaculture developments during the dictatorship and throughout that. And then it kind of started moving towards the south. So Los Lagos, which is like the region, which is like at this kind of northern part of the south, kind of in this graph, you can see that it started to increase. It kind of decreased throughout the years, and like the most southern parts of this zone are increasing their production throughout time. So the region that we are today analyzing has been like seeing an increasingly kind of expansion of the growth of salmon aquaculture, which has been something very kind of unique and it's very recent. It's very recent, like the development of the salmon farming in this zone. It's not something very usual that is like very relatable with the territorial and the local landscape. But this has been the trend, like try to develop like the production towards the south. And this was, several authors says that this has increased, especially after the ISA virus crisis of 2010. So after that crisis, like the local production started to move towards towards the south. In the other case, we see that Argentina doesn't have like this like a big tradition of salmon farming, at least. If we look at here, like the picture show this is a report from 2023, and you can see like the river salmon is very low in terms of tons and percentage of tons per year, like the production, but is more inclined to develop like their aquaculture production towards other species such as rainbow trout or these other animals. So both models are not very comparable in some cases because they were in Chile, as I say, like there was the dictatorship that initially tried to promote the aquaculture in this zone, and in the case of Argentina, this development has been kind of more recent. But however, there has been a lot of pressure by some political leaders at Argentina and local economists too, and also by like the company owners and businessmen who are trying to push for like a wider development of aquaculture in Argentina and portraying this as a way of attract more development to the country. So in terms of like the methodology, I firstly made 40 interviews during my the fieldwork, both in Chile and Argentina, in this very isolated zone. And I mostly interview local scientists, NGO, environmental members, indigenous leaders, members of the local government too, and this along with conducting like SNA, which is social network analysis, which is a technique that helps us to kind of get a more visual image of how are the relations and how are the relations in terms of like trust, mutual trust, legitimacy, who are the actors who are like more important, who have more connections in one territory. And so this technique is super important for analyzing, for example, two different countries and how they relate to the other, and their mutual connections, like internal connections. In terms of like the key biodiversity that we have in this territory, we have marine systems, kelp forests, whales, dolphins, orcas too. A lot of like people during the interviews tell me like with some nostalgia that they recall that during the pandemic a lot of these animals came out because of like the decrease of anthropogenic activity. Avifauna, we have a global seabird hotspot, endemic species too. Of course, there has been some invasive species such as like the beaver and the mink, and a lot of like the scientific work that is made at this context is made on like on the conservation of these important species. And what are like the current human pressures at this time, besides what I will try to address in terms of like the aquaculture? Of course, like there has been different studies that has reported like the collision of big cruises with like the marine mammals and whales, especially, and how this increasing of activity, because going to the Arctic region is very like a kind of a like a very trendy for tourism. So this generates, of course, like collisions, and this generates a lot of problems in terms of the impact to the local fauna. The Beagle Channel is a binational territory, as I started saying, limiting with Ushuaia, which has kind of 80,000 people, and Puerto Williams, which has 2,000 people. This has political, environmental, and economic implications because, as I said earlier, on one side you have like a government which could be kind of more inclined to have a tendency to address this kind of conflict in a more kind of defend our sovereignty way. And in the other hand, you can have a government which is very inclined to protect like the salmon farming production. So yeah, it's like a not very much like a not very larger space which separates like the two populations. Who are the indigenous populations in here? The Yagans were like mostly exterminated by settlers during the 18th and 19th century. They perceived the sea as a space, which was not only like a physical space, but also like a symbolic space, a space to inhabit, a space to exchange things, to exchange like their culture, their language. It was like there was documented that there was a lot of language during that period, the period of like the antique Yagans. And there are still some Yagan indigenous people at both sides of the countries. There are the Yagan indigenous people at Puerto Williams and in Ushuaia. In the case of Puerto Williams, the ILO convention was signed in 2006, and it was designed to protect the indigenous people, especially in terms of like protect like their rights to speech or every project that can undermine their territory. So what we found here is kind of this combination in terms of like what does aquaculture produces in their territories. Firstly, in terms of water, it produces pollution and eutrophication, disease spread, and oxygen depletion. And in the case of biological and ecological system, biodiversity loss, parasites and food web disruption, there are lots of documents about like how annually there are lots of escapes of farm salmon at this region. And in the case of the economy, there has been some studies that have shown like an increases in incomes, especially at the workers in the small zones in Chile. However, like the culture, considering that we have also indigenous population, is very complex in terms of like, especially considering that they perceive like the sea as part of their territory, as part, and they conceive like sailing, especially as part of their like kind of their daily lives. And company has faced a significant amount of sanctions due to problems in transparency and overcrowded farms throughout the years in Chile. This has been a problem of governance. So a lot of literature in the governance, in the case of Chile, Chilean aquaculture, said that the governance and the regulation for the case of aquaculture in Chile is kind of more reactive than preventive. So it tends to act when a crisis occurs rather than preventing that crisis, especially when there are like some viral outbreaks occurring. And as I said, like what happened in here, what was I observing is what during the conservative tide in South America, there was this kind of convergence between President Piñera and President Macri, both of them who wish to expand the salmon aquaculture towards the southernmost part of their countries. So they said like they wanted to invite directly to the Norwegian kings to visit their countries in order to like promote like salmon aquaculture as a kind of a local development strategy. Yeah, and this generated a local and binational resistance, which would operate differently between the two countries. And what did I saw in terms of like the actors? In terms of like the actors, I saw NGOs, local organizations, scientists, indigenous communities, environmentalists, salmon farmers, and fishermen, and all of them had differences in terms of resources, power imbalances, influence, and mutual trust. I don't know if you're very familiar with this, because this is kind of more economic oriented, but I think that this is super interesting for like knowing like the governance and how like governance functions in a kind of a globalized scheme. If you're not very familiar with that, this is Danny Rodriguez's trilemma. Danny Rodriguez is a professor of Harvard of economics. He's from Turkey, and he, at this book from 2010, said that these three components are like the core of our current like a state of governance, like our kind of our national and our global governance. But he said that it was kind of impossible to address to the three aspects at the same time in a perfect manner. So one of them every time would be kind of obliterated. The balance and the challenge is to try to address the three in a kind of more harmonic way, but it's kind of a difficult task to do. So some countries try to go for a kind of a more hyper-globalization strategy, which relies very much on like lowering the taxes for companies and increasing like the production of, especially for external companies, transnational companies, and some of other countries go for more kind of national sovereignty strategies, which rely more on the local power and the defense of the local resources. So this kind of trilemma is something very crucial, like for understanding how governance functions at a kind of a globalized scheme. Okay, this can look a little messy because there are a lot of colors, but it's very simple to address. This was like the social network analysis that I made. And what did I observe? After that, I made the interviews with the actors. I tried to see what were like the mutual connections, how are they like the mutual perceptions in terms of trust. So I put like the green, this kind of green dots and this kind of green lines in order to portray like a more harmonic and good relations between the actors, and these red lines in order to portray like conflictive relations. So this in here would be Ushuaia, and this in here would be Puerto Williams. And in the case of Chile, what I note was like a more dense networks between NGOs and local communities. So the local communities were kind of more reliant on the NGOs and the international NGOs, especially considering that they didn't have like the specialists for legal terms, for biological terms, or for try to address better like how to influence like in things such as public policy. And in the case of Argentina, what I found was the campaigns gain an international momentum, and the actors were kind of more autonomous, like the local community was kind of more autonomous to the NGOs, to the international NGOs. And at the same time, they had like this kind of more nationalistic view that this is our territory, so no one is gonna be like, no one outside us is gonna be telling us what to do. This was very particular for Argentina. I didn't find anything like that in Chile. So this was something very interesting. This is part of a fragment of an interview, and this is from a scientist from Ushuaia who's telling us how he saw like the push for developing aquaculture. And he said that it was kind of it mostly came from people who had like some properties or were probably people from doing teaching at universities, these aquaculture things, or economists. And he said that, as always, the economic argument is strong yet incomplete. And this is another line very interesting. Another scientist from Ushuaia says that I was asking to him, like, if this was a very widespread movement in Ushuaia to try to defend their territory. And he told me, no, this isn't like a very widespread movement. This is a movement from professional people who have like this kind of backgrounds that nature is something valuable and worth it. So this is not something that is totally widespread. And finally, this fragment is for the campaign manager from Greenpeace, who told me that even though the Argentinians achieved like a much higher kind of milestone in terms of like the achievement of their campaigns and or like their struggle, what they achieved like at Chile was super remarkable, considering all of the constraints that like environmentalists had to struggle in Chile, considering that, of course, it's a kind of a more centralized state. So yeah, this is I try to put this in a more schematic model, and like observe how like Norwegian companies kind of were pressuring like Argentinian administration and Chilean administration, which of course impacted on the salmon farming trends. and the local organizations were trying to prevent that. And in the case of international NGOs, they were displaying international campaigns and to protect like the local biodiversity. And this generated two important milestones. Firstly, that in Argentina, there was like this historic like achievement that was like the law number 1355, permanent ban of aquaculture in Tierra del Fuego. Like they like achieved that. Like there was like it's like 2 pages like the law, and it says like the all of the island, not only like in the continental zone, but also like in every part of the Argentina, which is like close to the Antarctica, is forbidden. Aquaculture is forbidden, especially at the Pichón. And in the case of Chile, this campaign achieved like the ceasing of all aquaculture concessions at the zone.
Do you know what year?
Yeah. The law from Chile was in 2021. From Argentina, sorry, 2021. And I will show you that this tendency was reversed, like very, yeah, last year.
Chile.
And in Chile, no, there was this period of concessions that was between 2018 and 2021. No, I had to look for the specific dates, but yeah, there was like during this period. Yeah. Because there were lots of developments and concessions like that were like approved at this, and they were the community tried to like push back. So in terms of like the telecouple analysis, of course, like in this case, Norway could be like the sending system in terms of like sending their capital and sending their technologies towards like the receiving territory. And the receiving systems will be, of course, these two that I frame, and the spillover would be global NGOs, international markets, and environmental advocacy networks. This is not something very linear, because of course there is some resistance. There is like an advocacy towards like trying to protect what was, because this is a very pristine zone. It's not like a over-exploded territory. This is something that hasn't been exploded yet. So in this is like one of my last slides. And yeah, I try to address a little more like the Rodrigues trilemma, how it operated in here. In the case of Chile, the system is kind of more export-oriented and prioritizing hyperglobalization, which could be like the kind of a more neoliberal way of understanding how to prioritize like the markets instead of like the local development. Chile has a unitary state with a more kind of centralized tradition, which has sometimes it has like it is kind of it makes difficult, according to the interviewees, especially at these remote zones, to kind of push back. Yeah. Considering that in the case of Argentina, there are a lot more spaces considered it is a federal state. This model is increasingly contested at the local level. As I said, like even though it's kind of a more kind of a top-down model, it's very contested, like at the local level. And the local movements try to revert top-down tendencies. Yeah. And in the case of Argentina, the environmental movements emphasizing this was something very unique. The environmental movements emphasizing a lot more like the question of national sovereignty. These are our resources. These belong to us. So nobody else will tell us like what should be here. And they have like this vision that these initiatives were like kind of the most promoted by people from Buenos Aires, from the capital, but from people who didn't know like the reality, the territory. Argentina is a more federal state, and this of course doesn't mean that it's kind of easier for environmentalists to do like environmental protection in there, but it generates like more layers in terms of power. And recent political shifts have attempted to reorient this model, as I will show you in the next slide. Oh, sorry for that convergence of puzzle of the letters. Yeah, last year, of course, right now there is a right-wing government in Argentina, and they promoted like to revert like the initial law from 2021 in order to push like the expansion of aquaculture, but to not expand it in the Beagle Channel. Yeah. So that was something that the communities could achieve at the time. Yeah, this was generated, of course, with growing interest from investors, with pressure from like the national government, from provincial political leadership, and pro-market shifts at the national level, as I said, because we have to recall that this movement of aquaculture expansion in Argentina was made mostly by President Macri, which was also like more from the right. And this strong local and transnational resistance shaped the outcome, which is why the Beagle Channel remains protected. In the case of Chile, has been happened something very particular, and that is that like the aquaculture, especially in the south, has been especially rising in protected areas. So this has been something very kind of ambivalent, because in terms of legal terms, these are protected areas, but in kind of concrete terms, they are like pushing these kind of endeavors right there. At least 48, no, 48, sorry for the 408 aquaculture concessions operate within protected areas. These cases show how telecoupled systems produce different configurations of power, governance, and ecological outcomes. Yes, that's my presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Camilo.